effort at Arizona State. And on behalf of the Arizona Historical Society and Arizona State University, I would like to welcome you to Rediscovering Earth in the Age of Loss, a lecture and conversation with writer William deBuys. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Bill, whose work I came to know more than a decade ago through his book, and I brought props, A Great Airness, Climate Change and the Future of the American Southwest, which has shaped our conversations about environment and place here in Arizona and the American West, as well as helping us think about how climate change is shaping our future. And this book in particular was generative in the development of a panel about climate change and environmental justice in Arizona, which is our contribution at Arizona State and actually a larger collaborative to the Climates of Inequality exhibit you see upstairs. And so as I introduce Bill, I want to tell you something about that exhibit and how it came to be. And so I'll ask for just a bit of forbearance as I tell you that story. That exhibit was developed by the Public History Program in the School for Historical, Philosophical, and Religious Studies. You will notice throughout this introduction I will use lots of ASU acronyms. In the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, as well as the School for the Future of Innovation in Society in the College of Global Futures. So we collaboratively began this work on the exhibit in 2017. Specifically, our work began as a member of a consortium of more than 20 public history programs worldwide, led by the Humanities Action Lab at Rutgers, to create this exhibit, which then has traveled to, I think, 4 countries and over 30 cities in the last several years. We built the project collaboratively. It was an effort co-led by Paul Martin and Ray Ostman, our colleagues in SFIS, who also made the initial investment in developing the project. The Arizona Historical Society became an enthusiastic partner. It was then led by James Burns and now by Dr. David Brickner, who has continued that enthusiasm and has helped to host the exhibit and lead our public programming forward. My public history methods course got to do the fun stuff. We got to build the exhibit, build the content. And we did this, as we did this, we had to start somewhere. And we started with A Great Airness. I'd read it prior to coming to Arizona State, but it's a remarkable book. Its ability to weave a broad narrative from the details of landscape and everyday life, both in the moment today and from the past. In doing that, A Great Airness brings the diverse cultures and ecosystems of Arizona to life. The grand Givas of Chaco Canyon, the ponderosa pines of the Mogollon Plateau, the red squirrels of Mount Graham, and the surveyor's flags of superstition vistas along the so-called Sun Corridor. And of course, the 336 miles of the Central Arizona Project, which became what we focused on in our the part of the exhibit we built. But it's really a remarkable weaving together of things. And rather than, I'm telling you about this book in a way because I don't want to say too much about Trails of Canyon Road, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. But the ability to put detail and story together makes Bill a rather remarkable and unique voice in the broader culture of American environment. The work of those students, more than 30 public history graduate students, online students, became the basis for teacher workshops, led by my colleague in public history, Aaron Kraft, who also leads our Helios-funded teachers initiatives. Our partners, Molly Cashman and Allison Wolf at the Walton Sustainability Teachers Academy in the School for Sustainability. Postdoc at SFIS, Nick Weller, and Allison Avery at Arizona Historical Society as well as several other folks, helped us to develop a lead a July Teachers Workshop. And it's really cool that we've had teachers and their students here at the Historical Society using the exhibit in their classroom. David Turkey, Jane Adams, and Liz Kapp supported the exhibit in different ways throughout its development. Jacqueline Rose, Selena Gammon, Jenna Bassett, and Liz actually helped us put it together, which was an absolute fun effort. And if you find me on Instagram, you can see a slow-mo video of it coming up. Finally, our Shippers leadership, Richard, Catherine, and Julian, as well as the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Jeffrey Cohen, have provided additional funding and support, and it's always important to acknowledge that. So with all that being said, it struck us as we were thinking about who we might bring into the lecture, that we should ask Bill deBuys. We thought it might have been nice to come in and contemplate the great arrogance 12 years on, or consider the implications of the 100th anniversary of the Colorado River Compact. Instead, Bill asked, when I pitched this to him, he said, could he offer something different? And I was like, well, what might we say different? And he said, well, something perhaps hopeful. And he also said his latest book, Trail to Cantaroba, and I hope I said it right, is really a triptych that began with the Great Arrogance. So in a sense, it was a journey to get from this one to Trail to Cantaroba, and there is another book in the middle. And as he was spinning the story, I couldn't resist. I had to read the book. And as I read Trail to Cantaroba, I could not help but see a path forward. It's a path nurtured by our human connections to the landscapes, to those things that surround and sustain us. And so as I read and as he spoke, I thought this is a perfect way to confront the moral dimensions of climate change and our humanity in this age of loss. So join me in welcoming Bill and the journey that he'll take us on tonight.
All right. I have to wire myself up, I guess. How is the volume of the voice? Okay. Well, thank you, Mark, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Good of us to be back in Arizona, from my rather frigid home in Mexico right now. Goodness, what a time we're in. Not just the terrible business in Ukraine, the political madness here in our own country, but we read about climate change almost every day. Just this last year, we had Hurricane Ian devastating South Central Florida. We've had floods in Pakistan that inundated a third of that entire country. Right now, 50 million people in 45 countries, because of climate change and because of political dysfunction, two things that seem to go together. 50 million people are on the brink of famine, especially in the Horn of Africa. Here in the Southwest, let's see if I can operate the slides here. This is a photograph I took near my home just a couple of months ago. I live on the west side of the San Bernardino Mountains in northern New Mexico, the village called El Valle. This is a shot taken in nearby Peñasco, looking east. The whole east side of the mountains were consumed in a combination of fires this summer. The fire here consumed an area equal to about half the size of Rhode Island. These are enormous fires. It was started by some Forest Service errors, but it grew to the size it did. It persisted for as long as it did because of unprecedented drought and because of wind phenomena that hadn't been seen in our area before. Climate change is having exactly the effects around the globe that the scientific community predicted would have 30 and 40 years ago. I wonder if some of you all are like me. As hard as you're working at your jobs, at your communities, trying to make things better, you wonder sometimes if with climate change and the other challenges our planet is facing, if all the good things you're doing are going to be in vain, if they're going to be canceled by something beyond your control. We do know that things are going to get worse. The world community is not going to be successful in limiting climate change to a 1.3 degree C raise, which was the aspirational goal of the Paris Accords of a few years ago. We're looking at a lot of bad change ahead, a lot of real terrible challenges. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about looking squarely at the facts and yet not losing heart. I want to talk about how we look at our planetary predicament without flinching, how we rediscover both the reality of what we're facing, but also how we reconnect to the beauty of the planet, to the resourcefulness of the planet, to prepare ourselves as the kind of first step to continue caring for Earth even more intensely than before. We have to find a way forward that doesn't involve being demoralized and that doesn't involve giving into cynicism, despair, or apathy. But there's a lot of room for platitudes on this subject. And I want to avoid those. The most honest way I can talk about these challenges is to share with you what Mark referred to as a journey, my journey. The journey each of you is on is different, that's for sure. But as we all strive, if we do a good job, perhaps we'll find ourselves on parallel paths. I've been immersed in environmental issues all my life, in land conservation and activism, but also in writing. And in the last decade and a half, my journey has taken the form of is something also that Mark referred to, a trilogy of books. Believe me, 15 years ago, I never would have had the nerve to start out writing 3 connected books. I'm not that great. It just kind of turned out that way, following one question to another. This is where it began. I was sitting in an auditorium like this one. Actually, no, it was a meeting, a conference area in a big hotel. And a scientist put this slide up on the screen. It was January 2006. And this basically depicts a forecast for mid-century of where water supplies would be declining, surface stream flow. And I looked at it and I saw these alarming bright colors in the southwest. And I thought, holy smokes, if what this thing is predicting turns out true, and what it's predicting is like a 25% decline in surface water availability in the southwest by mid-century. If this is true, the land I love, my home, is going to be transformed. And so, sitting there, kind of coming fully awake, having been daydreaming through all the presentations until I saw this map, I resolved I wanted to go and find the people who made this map and talk to them and find out how they came up with it. And so, in doing that, that's what started me on the path to producing This book, the one that Martin mentioned a while ago, it came out finally in 2011, I believe. And in it, I don't make predictions, but I report the predictions of the scientific community, and they're predictions that all of you all are familiar with, that the Southwest will become hotter and drier, water resources will become more and more limited. We'll have a new normal, roughly equal to droughts of the past. Precipitation, winter precipitation will go down. Summer precipitation may be a mystery for quite a long time. One thing we know for sure, the higher temperatures will mean more evaporation, which will mean more stress on living systems, et cetera, and more fires, as you saw on the earlier slide. The warnings were dire, and they were accurate, and a lot of good people have striven very hard to avert the catastrophes that they forecast. But the resistance to those predictions has also been enormous, sometimes malicious, sometimes simply inert and stupid, and we haven't made as much progress as we should have made. Here's the only other data slide I want to show you, and I'm sure it's familiar to most of you. This is the so-called Keeling curve. Charles David Keeling, as a graduate student in the 1950s, devised a machine that could measure atmospheric carbon. He did this back in the late 1950s. In 1958, he took his machine up onto Mauna Loa on the big island of Hawaii, high elevation, beautiful mixing of the trade winds up there, a good sampling location for measuring what's going on with the atmosphere of Earth. And he began measuring carbon dioxide. Back then it was 315 parts per million. And look at the curve. This is about the point at which the National Academies of Science alerted President Lyndon B. Johnson that global warming was going to create problems for the future of American society and of the planet as a whole. This is where James Hansen testified before Congress and laid out the whole scenario, including the fact that we probably wouldn't manage to rally to the subject politically, and that until the problem got very, very bad. This is the point at which Bill McKibben published The End of Nature in the New Yorker, 1989, which was the first popular discussion, explanation of the phenomenon of climate change. And on. And here's the year in which that map of water resources globally came out, 2005. I saw it in 2006. And here we are roughly today. And as you can see, in spite of a great deal of talk and a good deal of effort, the curve itself really hasn't changed. So we're in a pickle. Some people, and I'm not sure I may have coined this or somebody else did, call this the suicide note of industrial civilization. I think that's not a bad characterization, actually. Much of the world seems to have adopted what I would call a Thelma and Louise strategy on climate change. You just gun it as long as you can until you fly off the cliff. At any rate, A Great Aridness was the first book of my accidental trilogy, and virtually the day I sent off the manuscript to the publisher, I started packing for a wildlife expedition in Southeast Asia. We were headed for the mountains dividing Vietnam and Laos, actually going to the Cayenne Twin National Protected Area in Lao PDR, Lao People's Democratic Republic. The Annamite Mountains divide Vietnam and Laos. Very rough country, tropical jungle, and we were going to look for what was then, and probably still is now, the rarest large terrestrial mammal on planet Earth. When the vaquita, a freshwater porpoise in the upper Gulf of California, when it wakes out, as seems likely and soon, this will be the rarest large mammal on planet Earth. We can drop the word terrestrial. It's called a saola. It's a beautiful animal. Check these horns. When the animal stands in profile, its two horns merge visually so that it looks a little bit like a unicorn. And so it has the nickname the Asian unicorn. It's a forest browser. It looks like a burly antelope. It's actually has common ancestors with cows, with goats. At any rate, we were going to look for the saola, and back then, at the time of our expedition in 2011, there might have been a few hundred saola left on Earth. Today, probably not more than a few dozen remain. And this winter, make a note, the Saola Foundation with various allies will be making a last gasp, all-out search for the very last extant saola in those Annamite mountains, in the hope of eventually capturing them to develop a captive breeding program. At any rate, our expedition took us to the back of beyond, far beyond the last villages, up into country that really is beyond the reach ordinarily of either government of Laos or of Vietnam. That's why, as you see, Meat, one of our guides here, has this AK-47, because we expected to encounter gangs of poachers who would be similarly armed. We were going into some of the most verdant and productive forests on the planet, but also some of the most ravaged. In these forests, snare lines, kilometers long, were common, all along the length, or equivalent of a couple of miles, of a mountain ridge line, or transversely across a canyon. These hedges of chopped brush with a gap every 3 meters or so. The hedges just built up so that animals couldn't go through unless they were big enough to jump over, and very few were. They would have to go through the gaps, and in each gap there was a snare made with bicycle brake cable, an ubiquitously available material. We didn't find any saola, but we found many of those snare lines with many dead animals. This is a ferret badger. This is a silver pheasant. This is the fawn of a large antlered muntjac, one of the rarest deer species in the world. This animal actually went into the stew pot that night because we were far from our base and getting very hungry. The snaring that we documented supplies the wildlife trade, which provides animals and animal parts for the so-called cures of traditional Chinese medicine. Some animals, their meats smoked or sometimes caught alive, also went to restaurants, wild food being deemed healthier than domestic raised food. Economic prosperity in East Asia means that now, today, many millions more people than at any time in the past can afford to buy these exotic foods and remedies. And so the wildlife trade booms. As a result, more and more forests in that part of the world, but also in Africa and even in South America, are essentially empty. They're forest where, in the words of one biologist, you can't find anything bigger than a cocker spaniel. I hasten to add that the wildlife trade is merely the most gruesome manifestation of humankind's war on wildlife. Population growth, industries of all kinds, including industrial agriculture, pollution that they produce, climate change, and much more, are all powerful forces in reducing the wildlife of our planet to a mere sliver of the pie chart of life. You've perhaps seen reports of a recent study indicating the world has less than a third of the wildlife it did in the 1960s. That's when I went to college. 2/3 of the world's wildlife have vanished during my adult life. I take that personally. We're doing a very poor job of stewarding the planet. At any rate, this book is the second book of the trilogy. It concerns the salvage and the wildlife trade, but it's also an adventure story of the expedition, and it exalts the beauty of the tropical forest. But when I finished this book, I really hit a wall. I was heartsick, depressed, and increasingly numb. One image really stuck with me. This is a red-shanked duke, possibly the most handsome monkey in the world, dangling upside down from its snare pole, its fur still soft and luminous, the earth only inches past the reach of its delicate hand. I felt haunted by this animal's slow death from dehydration and despair. And its despair, I learned, was contagious. I felt it too. All of that is background. Now we get to the real business at hand, how to deal with those facts, how to deal with these circumstances in which we live. I was not long back from Laos and Vietnam when something happened for me at Canyon de Chelly, which is a fabulous place. I'm sure many of you have been there. I was on the rim of the canyon. It was October, a glorious time of year in the Southwest, as each of you know. Cottonwoods just ablaze. And how fortunate are we to live in a land that offers this. Off to the side, I saw this. It was a white horse partway up a dune at the bottom of the cliff. The dune was corrugated with sheep trails. Thorny, inedible green shrubs stippled the sand. I couldn't imagine what the horse was finding to eat. The land was badgered, almost barren, and yet I could not take my eyes from the view. A bright white horse amid emerald shrubs on purple-red sand. The color, the contrast, the unadorned solitude of the forest, all the elements of the tableau converged in a way that was more than pretty, more than merely picturesque. I felt stunned and then inspired, although I couldn't say how. I snapped a dozen photographs, sensing that the horse and the land on which it grazed answered a question I had not known how to ask. Much later, I realized the photographs expressed something I had failed to grasp in the Lao forests. The realization was almost mathematical. It said that Earth's beauty is inexhaustible. Even where the world is most diminished, beauty remains. The forces that erode the life of the planet can reduce but not eliminate that beauty, for beauty is intrinsic to the planet, or if not to the planet, then to the way we Homo sapiens have evolved to see it. And the beauty belongs to us, and it inheres in us, and needs to be conserved in us too, for we are part of the planet. That wasn't all. Think about it. If beauty is infinite, then the need, for some of us, the obligation to defend such beauty is also infinite. The obligation will last as long as beauty lasts, and so it will have no end. I thought I was on to something with this, a piece of the puzzle I was trying to solve, or at least a fragment of a piece. It was just a start. Then, in 2016, I was invited to join a medical expedition bound for one of the remotest regions of Nepal, a place called Upper Dolpa, which some of you may have heard of, for it is the locus of Peter Matheson's nonfiction classic, The Snow Leopard. The expedition's purpose was to deliver primary health care to people who rarely or never see a clinician. We were the Nomads Clinic, a project of the Upaya Zen Center of Santa Fe. We included doctors, nurses, Buddhists, clerics, supernumeraries like me, and many guides, muleteers, and camp. We were both a medical expedition and a pilgrimage, bound for holy places. But I didn't get that part. I was a slow and stubborn learner, and I resisted the pilgrimage idea. I was no pilgrim. I was a hard-boiled journalist and book writer. I was going on this 150-mile trek over 5 17,000-foot passes in the high cold desert between the Himalayan crest and the Tibetan plateau, and I was doing it just to see a little country and to test an idea. The idea was this: might it be time for people who care about Earth to begin thinking of themselves as hospice workers? Might the ethics and values of hospice lead to a kind of earth care that was more effective and also kinder to its practitioners than the relentless striving to fix things that I was accustomed to? I don't want to dwell on this, except to say that I was intrigued by two medical findings. First, that patients who go into hospice live at least as long and often longer than patients in comparable health who submit to drastic interventions. As Atul Gawande puts it in Being Mortal, the lesson seems almost Zen. You live longer only when you stop trying to live longer. Meanwhile, the quality of life enjoyed by hospice patients in their last weeks and months is incomparably superior to their peers in the ICU. This is also true for their loved ones and their caregivers, which is the second finding. While hospice nurses do not work less hard or with less dedication than their counterparts in intensive care, they are 3 times less likely to suffer major depression. Our clinic would practice a kind of medicine similar to hospice and its cousin, palliative care. We would have no access to x-rays, scans, lab work, or surgery. Our pharmacy was limited and long-term drug therapies were out of the question. Indeed, follow-up visits were all but impossible. So we would have to prioritize care over cure. And like good hospice workers, we would have to focus on making the present moment as good as it could be. And we would have to recognize our limits and not become attached to specific outcomes. Personally, I wanted to watch our doctors. I wanted to watch their ethics in action and to think about applying those ethics to earth care. What would that mean in environmental work? Let me quickly say that applying the concept of hospice to earth care is an exercise in metaphor, and the metaphor is imperfect. Earth is not dying. Irrespective of the damage we sapiens accomplish, life will continue on the planet as it has for billions of years until the sun runs out of energy, billions of years from now. What's dying is the wildest and most fragile and perhaps the most beautiful part of creation to which we belong. As measured in terms of carbon emissions, the wild part of life on Earth is down to less than 3%, probably now more like 1.5% of mammalian mass on the planet. just in the year 1900, that fraction was about 18%. Now we're getting down to the flat line of wildness. A recent report asserts that around 1 million species already face extinction, many within decades. Those million species constitute about a quarter of all the animals about which enough is known to support an assessment. But back to the expedition. It took me 6 weeks on the trail in the 2016 trek. I went twice. 6 weeks in 2016 and 5 more weeks on a return expedition in 2018. I had to go twice. The first time to start, the second time to make sense of the first time. There was just too much stimulation to really come to terms with what I was experiencing there. But it took both trips to realize fully that I was indeed a pilgrim, and that life is, or it should be, a pilgrimage. Attaining that realization was crucial. It allowed me to complete the third book of my accidental trilogy, which is this one. And I just want to give you a little, I've been talking about all this heavy stuff. I just want to give you a little flavor of the book to give you the sense that maybe it's not all slogging through heavy, sort of the yogurt of unhappiness. It's a book in 61 episodes. I don't even call them chapters. They're so short. This is writing for the ADHD page. These things are rarely more than 2,000 or 2,500 words long. This is one of the shortest ones of all. It's titled Yatra. Yatra means pilgrimage. And this is the view from where this little episode is set. We're looking down on the village of Shina. And by the way, those of you who do irrigation, imagine managing the irrigation of these, whatever it is, a couple of hundred small terrace fields, each one with a different water right, each one under different curves, all of it fed by torrents coming out of snow and glacier melt down here, and how in a village of just a couple of hundred people do you apportion the labor to maintain the infrastructure and then to adjudicate who gets how much for how long, negotiating along feuds between families and extended families and all that stuff. And people say that rural life is simple. Forget about it. The long climb up from Shinan, which Govinda took on alone, is for me a metronomic trudge. Step upon step, breathing hard, I think only of the act of walking. With amusement, I realize that I'm still learning to walk. I am learning, for instance, that I must walk slowly enough that I do not need to rest. At the right pace, my lungs and legs work in synchrony, and I neither gasp nor feel weak. If I stop longer than a few seconds, I lose my rhythm. It's as though my lungs and legs leave their posts, go on break, and refuse to come back. And even when forced to resume their duties, they resist working together. The trick is to keep them at their jobs. Like the tortoise that raced the hare in Aesop's fable, I need to stay in motion. Old Aesop must have walked up many a mountain. I'm lightheaded near the top of the climb. My trail mates sprawl on rocks in packs beside them, and here comes a family of villagers, mother, father, and one boy, headed down to Shina. In Dolpo, upon encountering strangers, you bow slightly. If your hands are free, you might bring them together in a gesture of prayer. And you say, Namaste. It's a simple word, but profound in its depth. It roughly translates as, I bow to the divine in you. By contrast, our English hi or hello have no more meaning than marks of punctuation. Each member of the passing family says namaste to me. Namaste, I say back, and their bright smiles continue to shimmer in my mind's eye minutes after they're gone. I probably need to drink some water. This morning, Tenzin spoke in our circle. As usual, his delivery was staccato and epigrammatic, more poem than paragraph. Tenzin's gift was to mix the cosmic with the trivial. Stop. Take you into you, he coached. Absorb mountain. Eat later. More important than snack bar, than granola bar, is getting blessings from our journey. He paused, looking around the group to gauge his audience. Every day a yatra, he said. A yatra being a religious journey or pilgrimage. All we have been through, you will feel this. You will feel lighter, I think. Such lightness, I imagine, would render one indifferent to whether the trail climbed or fell, whether the distance to go was long or short. Such lightness might even enable the resolute pilgrim to round the bend and say, namaste, and mean it to any other creature, be it saint, songbird, or snow leopard. On this day, alas, I cannot tell my lightness from my lightheadedness. But perhaps, if I keep walking, eventually I will. The issue I thought I was going to the far side of the Himalaya to wrestle down concerned applying hospice ethics to earth care. And nothing I learned or experienced contradicted this hypothesis. But I mainly came away with a list of slogans. Care over cure. Avoid attachment to specific outcomes. Optimize the present, but also recognize and honor endings. Strong back, soft front. This was the motto of our clinic. By which, I mean, you have to be ready for the hard stuff, but not by shutting out the people and the other beings entangled with them. One way to conceptualize strong back, soft front a little better is to think of the reverse. Strong front, soft back. We've had politicians like that. Very blustery, but very paranoid. These ideas I recognized finally, really at the end of our first trip as we were starting to head down slope, begin our journey back toward home. These ideas fit in my mind. They took up good spaces there, but somehow they didn't take up residence in my heart. They were intellectual things. And I felt that there was still something missing. And here, I'm just going to start going to sort of random slides as I finish up here, just show you some things unattached to what I'm actually saying. The real breakthrough for me turned out to be something else. I needed to make peace with sorrow. My delight in the beauty of the natural world coexisted with grief at its destruction. Both the biodiversity business, climate change, so many other things as well. These emotions were like cellmates who couldn't get along if they lived in my mind and my heart. And their constant argument created a moral ache. I either had to dispel that or I had to learn how to live with it. Dealing with that sorrow became the real business of my travel in the Himalayas. I had to rekindle a sense of hope, and not a simple kind of hope. Having lost my way, I had to find a new way. I had to reconnect to Earth's beauty, not as adornment, but as nourishment. I also had to revise my understanding of science, focusing not on the science of power and control, but on the science that swings open the gates of wonder. In the end, I found what I was looking for, and the credit goes to my teachers, my companions, our guides and crew, the Buddhist priests, the medicos, both Nepali and American, and our hosts, the villagers of Dolpo, who were also our patients, and whose cheerful stoicism was profoundly inspiring. And also, the land itself was a teacher. The indescribably beautiful expanses of those mountains, a little of whose spaciousness, I pray, might have seeped into me. Thanks to these teachers, I actually did get answers to my questions. But I can only partly tell you what they were. And this is not a cheesy spoiler alert. I really mean it. The lessons don't fit into sound bites. They work their way into you like rain into a tent. I try to summarize the lessons in the final 16 words of the book. So the whole book comes down to 16 words at the end. Here they are. Every day, a yatra. Every situation, a clinic. Absorb the beauty. Build an ark. Be alive. I can unpack those 16 words for you a little bit, but really to grasp them fully, you've got to take the longer journey. Read the book. Every day a yatra. On a pilgrimage, you cannot go missing. You have to show up and be present. And you have to be clear about your intentions, especially in rough country. And our daily lives can be very rough country indeed. We are always learning how to walk. I have come to take that concept very seriously. And at the age of, I guess I hate to say it, 73, I still have a lot to learn about how to walk. Every situation, a clinic. I so admire the clinicians I work with, their approach to each new patient, whether the case was simple or complex, whether joyful or gruesome. Whether they were always compassionate and fully focused. Their behavior was an inspiration. Strong back, soft front. That's just the beginning. When the kaka starts to hit the fans, I try to imagine myself as a medic in a clinic, stepping up to the next challenging case. Absorb the beauty. Yes, it's a nourishment. You have to make time for it, create space for it, and seek it out, even in the most unlikely places. Build an ark. Some of you I know are ark builders with the McDowell Conservancy. Here we return to the domain of metaphor. The diminishment of the natural world behooves us to become latter-day Noahs. We need to build arks, vehicles to carry the beauty and diversity of Earth's present creation across the inhospitable seas that lie ahead. Many of you have been at this kind of work already. Others among you will be. The work can take many forms, building arks in the form of parks, wildlife refuges, reserved forests, wildlife corridors, restricted use zones. The potential designs are legion. Same thing for building soil, or restoring balance to abused ecosystems, or, just as important, for building or restoring balance to fractured communities. Old leafy arcs, whether they be parks, natural areas, towns, or cities, need an overhaul to become seaworthy, and even then the voyage is sure to be rough. The imperative is to build, restore, and launch as many arcs as possible. Some will sink, some will be blown off course, and not all the rest will get through with their cargoes intact. But if we prepare, not for the worst, but for the best, some of our arcs will compete their voyage to the better days. The more we build, the more we'll make. So we need to build the way, like good hospice workers, without worrying too much about outcomes we cannot control. The last item, be alive, which is to say, be in love with life, yours, and also the lives of those around you and of the creatures and the elements of this world. I want to add that being fully alive means being hopeful. But being hopeful, in the deepest sense, is not a simple business. And so I'd like to close by reading another episode from my book. It's just a little bit more than a page, and it's titled simply Hope. Hope means different things to different people. In its simplest form, it expresses a desire for things to turn out well, for a worrying story to have a happy ending. Most of the time, when people ask about hope, they're asking, will everything be all right? Can we return somehow to how things used to be when this worry did not exist? With regard to climate change, the answer is no. Too much CO2 and other heat-trapping gases already burden the planet's atmosphere and oceans. The effects will be with us for at least several lifetimes. We cannot draw a get-out-of-jail-free card because none exists. But hope has other meanings. Václav Havel wrote, hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It's not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. Havel was linking hope to the philosophical distinction between instrumental good and intrinsic good. Something is instrumentally good if it produces a desired result. Its goodness depends on outcome. But a thing is intrinsically good if its goodness, but a thing is intrinsically good if doing it is virtuous of and by itself. That is, if its value exists independent of result. The essence of hope, Havel was saying, is to believe in the intrinsic goodness of right action. Through his many years as an outcast in prison, fighting the Soviet domination in Czechoslovakia, Havel never knew, until the Soviet Union's final collapse, if his efforts would succeed. Yet he persisted in a spirit of hope, knowing his course was correct. The novelist Barbara Kingsolver also distinguishes between hope and optimism. In her view, the pessimist would say, it's going to be a terrible winter. We're all going to die. The optimist would say, oh, it'll be all right. I don't think it'll be that bad. The hopeful person would say, maybe someone will still be alive in February, so I'm going to put some potatoes in the root cellar just in case. Kingsolver concludes, hope is a mode of survival. I think it's a mode of resistance. The hope she describes is close to the ecological notion of surprise. That sometimes big consequential things happen with virtually no warning. An earthquake or the fall of the Soviet Union being good examples. To trust in the uncertainty of the future believing in the possibility, however remote, of beneficial change. This is the essence of hope. Of course, surprise is no panacea. It can harm as well as benefit. The new coronavirus triggering a pandemic being a salient case in point. Surprise comes to us out of the vastness of what we don't know. It is amoral and uncaring, but it is also central to true hopefulness. Roshi Joan, the founder of the Nomads Clinic, puts surprise and uncertainty at the center of her teaching. Placing trust in not knowing, she says, offers a strategy for dealing with dark times. Change is certain, and there is always a chance things will improve. Here is where King Solver's wisdom connects with Howell's. King Solver is talking about future surprise, the uncertainty of how the winter that lies ahead will turn out. Howell is talking about how we carry ourselves in the meantime. We have to do what makes sense, irrespective of that. In jail, Howell could not know if the Soviet Union would crumble during his lifetime, nor could Nelson Mandela, during 33 years of imprisonment, know when apartheid might similarly disintegrate. But when the long-desired surprise arrived, both men, having done what makes sense, seized the moment and helped render the surprise as beneficial as possible. The essence of their preparation is that they never lost hope. Thanks very much.
I think Bill will be happy to take questions, and if you could just repeat the question, Bill, so that everyone just raise your hand and they'll call in the old-fashioned way.
Yes, sir.
With this whole presentation thinking about hope, there was one question that really just kind of pervaded my mind the entire time. Where do you draw the line between hope about that things will pervade despite climate change and this common, I don't want to say ignorant, but very common feeling I've seen for that climate change won't be that bad? Like, where is there a specific line you can draw there? Like, how do you differentiate between that makes sense?
Let me make sure I rephrase that. So the question is, what kind of line might exist between kind of hope I was talking about and the idea that maybe climate change won't turn out so bad? Is that
Yes.
about it? Well, where I started was with the idea that we have to look at the facts with a dry-eyed kind of frankness. And if we do that, if we really look at the science of climate change, we'll get rid of that idea that climate change won't turn out so bad. The science is pretty clear. The facts are pretty clear. In fact, one of the things that I learned when I was doing the research on a great aridness is that there's quite a gap between what scientists can publish and what they believe. They publish things they can prove in a sense. They don't tend to write opinion pieces. They publish what they can document through empirical data gathering. What they believe, their intuition, their sense of where things are trending is often quite different. And among the scientists I spoke to working on great aridness, there was no question that they were expecting really terrible things down the line. And in fact, I remember getting a call from one dear scientist friend of mine when the Las Conchas fire was burning in New Mexico in 2011. At that time, we thought it was as bad as things could get until this summer. He was driving up toward Los Alamos. The mountains were on fire. The fire was ebbing. The whole mountainside was charred, and he was near tears. He was saying, I can write about this stuff as a scientist, but when I see the lands that has been my research all my life go up in smoke, it breaks my heart. So I think we can dispense with that idea that climate change won't be so bad. We're just at we're, as the Brits would say, early doors on climate change right now. We're going to see really spectacular changes. We haven't really borne the brunt of the kind of sea level rise that, be asserting itself in the course of this century. And in fact, the research since a great aridness came out pretty well establishes that here in the Southwest, our coniferous forests, the green blankets that wrap our mountains, those coniferous forests will be a rarity in 50 years. Fire, insects, heat death, drought are going to take out most of our coniferous forests in the Southwest. We're at just the beginning point of the transformation of landscape after landscape after landscape. So with that said, I think the struggle for hope is going to become only more intense, and we're going to have to embrace an almost Buddhist sense of impermanence, and we're going to have to take that view that Pavel and Mandela had. Just do the right thing as time goes on, and then when the facts might break in your favor, you're ready to make the most of it. And that's the essence of the time. Thank you.
So thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful. You mentioned Halifax had found the Nomad Center. I also saw you in an interview with her Press magazine. Did she introduce you to Nomad Center and work there, or how did she begin working with the local plan?
The question is how I got connected with Roshi Jonah Halifax and with the Nomads. And the connection is actually sort of funny. Her last boyfriend was a good buddy of mine. And so we got to know, this is ages ago. I cannot remember when I met her. We've known each other a long, long time. And when that fellow, who was a really remarkable human being, when he passed away, actually had a long decline, and so we would meet, Roshi and I, talk about his decline, and would mourn him, and then when he passed away, we grieved together. So we were just pals. I was not a follower of her. She is the abbot of the Paya Zen Center in Santa Fe, and I think one of the things that she appreciates about me is that since I'm not a follower, I give her, some shit and joke with her quite a lot. So she was the one, I think she recognized after I got back from law and had the deep blues that I needed to do something. And so she invited me to join the Nomads in that 2016 expedition. It was a life-changing experience for which I will always be grateful. She is also a really magnificent teacher. Yes.
Just wondering, do you have hope that races, cultures, philosophies, together?
Going to repeat the question. The question is whether I have hope that people from different backgrounds, ethnicities, nations, religions, will find a way to work together to deal with the challenges of climate change and presumably other challenges as well. And I would say emphatically, yes, but not everywhere. You know, I'm a minority in the community where I live. I live in a Hispanic village in the mountains of northern New Mexico, and have for most of the last 50 years. And it's been really good for me to live in a minority, a very small minority part of the world. But I think, you know, in the Southwest, there are times when our communities do come together, Native, Hispano, Gringo, all working together. I go to a place like New York City, and I think this place has a lot of rough edges. But talk about a genuine and multicultural community, somehow functions. It does. I think we're probably, in many places, we'll summon the better angels of our nature as we confront some of these problems. But my fear, which is equal, is that the deniers, the people who are living on crazy street, who refuse to look at the facts, and I talk about this in the book, as the facts become clearer and clearer, harder and harder to deny, they're not going to come around. They're actually, many of them, and we're seeing it, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're just going farther down crazy street, because to begin to ascend to the one little bit of change in fundamental belief threatens all the rest of their cognitive structure. So we'll see areas where nothing really works. It's going to be really spotty. Thinking about this, I recall going to a presentation on climate change by Bill McKibben at New Mexico State University. This was quite a few years ago. And Bill gave, as he always does, a brilliant talk about climate change. And at the end, he was standing, you know, in the front of the proscenium, and various people came up to talk to him. A lady asked the question. She said, well, now you've convinced me that climate change is real. So what do we do to protect ourselves from it? And Bill answered right away. He said, live in a strong community. And the lady asked the obvious follow-up question, how do we find a strong community? And Bill fired back just as fast. He said, we don't, we build it. And so that's part of that art building. That's part of, you know, that's the hands-on part of living out the hope that we can do something.
That's a follow-on question I have was, how do we get more people in this country to care and then to do something about it? Because I think there's something about our American culture, when you see the wildfires, you don't hear anything about the animals. When the wildfires were in Australia, you'd see the singed koalas, the burnt kangaroos, and the people are mourning over their animals. Nothing here. And the other thing is that anytime Americans talk about preserving wild places, it's for the recreation dollars it brings into the community or to the watershed it provides us humans. I just don't, you know, I become distressed about, I mean, I've been worried about animals since 16, Greenpeace came to our high school. I just don't know how to get us to care and then to do something about it.
Yeah, great question. How do we get people to care about the environment, about water? And how do we get people to do something. In America, our attention spans are coming like this. We're sucking down information, or what we think is information, through our siloed internet favored sites. We're not speaking across our gaps. And in America, everything is measured in terms of its economic value, and almost never in terms of its spiritual value, in terms of beauty, in terms of just genuine compassion and respect and reverence for the world. I don't know how you make the revolution that has to be made, other than to just keep bearing witness in a way that is true to those other values. And eventually, it's kind of like those potatoes in the winter, in the root cellar. Eventually, maybe that's what's going to get us through. But to quote the great social philosopher Marvin Gaye, I throw up both my hands on that. I have been writing books on these subjects for a long time. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that books really don't change people's minds very much. But I live with the hope and belief that each thing that goes out there is another quantum that just goes into the weight of evidence. And that over time, if we just do our best to keep bearing witness to the truth we know, will have an effect. I'm sure there are designers of public campaigns who have all kinds of good ideas about how to marshal public opinion and rally this way or rally that way. That's not my métier, but I'm all for people to push ahead in those areas. We look at our big NGOs, the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, Wildlife Conservation Society, some of the others are doing great jobs, raising billions of dollars. But it's still, a small part of the overall society. Yeah.
Thank you. On that, I personally think that individuals inspire other individuals. I know that my behavior, I've changed, being inspired by. But I wanted to make another comment and ask you a question. The comment came from the Barbara Kingsolver book, what hope looks like. And I think an example that came to mind was the sea vault in Norway. That sprung to mind with that quote.
That's a heck of a root cellar, isn't it?
Yeah. That is such a hopeful act. And my question for you, and first, thank you for being here tonight. What I'd like to ask you is how writing you are practicing hospice care.
Well, the question, I wish I could summarize that whole statement. It was very nice. The lady, Melanie, said that we do change people person to person. I believe that's true too. In fact, that Walker Percy in the movie Go has this image of people handing people along. We're always doing that, moving people along to other people, helping in that way. Now, what was your question?
How are you practicing hospice care?
Oh, how am I practicing hospice care? Well, on a daily basis, I have been stewarding a small patch of land for 50 years. It's my little farm. And so I think of that as I'm doing my best. I'm trying to, a couple of things are going on. I'm trying to tend the land to be a good steward. I'm also trying constantly to learn from the land, to be its good student. And I think that's true whenever we're in a hospice relationship or any kind of care relationship, that the good things go both ways, and they really went both ways on that expedition, those expeditions, those clinics in the fall. So that's the main thing, and trying to work a little bit on the management of the forests around where I live and the community in which I live. And we're all, after the big fire on the other side of the mountain range, as a writer, I wrote about that, and one of the main points I made is that for those of us on the unburnt side of the mountain, we dodged a bullet, but climate change has unlimited ammunition. And so what happened this summer for us on the unburnt side of the mountains was really addressed with us. So, in terms of practicing hospice, I'm trying to do it by bearing witness as a writer and by giving some name. And once in a while by getting involved, conservation. Yeah, all the way in the back.
Thank you so much for your I'm a parent and a small children. I just wanted to ask you your thoughts on how to teach our children about the book that we're talking about, and how do we prepare them for the reality that is to come, the global warming, environment destruction. I think grappling with this as a parent, I was the future that they're inheriting.
Yeah. That was one of the great questions of our time. The question that was asked is, how do we communicate with our children about this? How do we prepare young people for the difficult future that we face? What is our message to them? I have a couple of thoughts on that. I think if I were 15 years old right now in 2022, I would be just mad as hell. I would be so angry. And I was angry enough when I was 15 in 1966. Or 65, whatever it was. But I'd be even madder, angrier now. And I try to address the question of anger in Kanji Road, in the book. There's a section in there titled Sacred Rage. And my message to an angry young person, I'm sort of skipping to the middle of your question instead of at the beginning, but would be, you're right to be mad. But here's the deal. You want your anger to be like the steam in a steam turbine. Not just blowing out through every gasket and leak, but actually doing work, producing energy, being directed, and using that anger toward an end. So that would be part of it. When I taught, I came to taught in colleges and stuff, and done workshops with younger kids and so forth. I came to the conclusion that the content of what I tried to communicate was in the end not very important. That what the students picked up from me more than anything else was my being, my behavior, how I carried myself. And that's what they took away more than anything else was an example of how to be in the world. And so I think that's the best thing we can do for our kids is speak honestly and openly about things. Don't try to stifle the anger, try to direct it somewhere, and be honest about our own anger and show how we can focus it, embody the direction that we want the kids to go. What else can we do?
We have time for one last question. No pressure.
So steering toward avid travel. I also really enjoy traveling. Travel, the condition of the footprint that I create. How you do, and if you think emerging industries and ecotourism is a solution or just something possible that.
That's a really good question. The question is, how do I and how do we grapple with the business of our carbon footprint? We all want and need, think we need to see far parts of the world at times, or just to travel on business or whatever. And so how do we grapple with this, with our own responsibility to minimize our carbon pollution? And I think about it all the time. And my partner doesn't, we've been together for 17 years. She doesn't think about this kind of thing the way I do. She's ready to just hop on. She wants to go to Australia this spring. She wants to do this. We've had some difficult words. I have come to the point that and I write a little bit about this in Kanjuroba. I mean, all these rich by definition, because we can afford to go to the other side of the world, these rich white people from North America going to Nepal. What's the carbon footprint of that? How does that line up on the balance of doing good versus doing harm? These are calculations that are beyond me. But I am resolved not to get on a plane for anything less than something consequential, something that I really feel I need to do, and that needs to be done. And so I won't be going to Australia for recreation, or just visiting. And I'll try just to have my recreation as much muscle powered as I can. So yeah, I think about it all the time. I'm trying to dial it down. But I'll tell you this, if I had a serious writing project that required travel, and the only way I could get to the information, to the news, the feeling that I needed.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Namaste.